In just 5 minutes, Jasmine Crockett turned a public insult into a national shockwave. When Vice President J.D. Vance called her a freeloader on live TV, millions expected her to stay quiet. But then she exposed $3.2 million in government money that he couldn't explain. What proof did she show? That made him wish the world hadn't been watching. The red tally light on the C-SPAN camera blinked, then locked in. Room 214 of the Capitol wasn't just live. It was armed. No edits, no delay. Just power pressure and a nation watching. At the center, a hearing on $81 billion in federal spending, housing, food assistance, Medicaid. But beneath the surface, this wasn't about numbers. It was about who deserves help and who gets to decide. And today, that decision sat across the table from her. Vice President J.D. Vance walked into applause sharp as knives. The press called him a voice for forgotten America, but his eyes didn't scan for allies. They hunted weakness. His suit screamed restraint. His stride screamed ambition. He didn't sit. He took position. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. At the far end of the witness table, she sat coiled in silence. No flash, no notes, just presence. Her navy blue blazer caught the light, but her face didn't flinch. Not even when Vance turned to look directly at her and smirked. Around them, the air was taut. Reporters adjusted mics with nervous fingers. One Democratic aide muttered, "He's going for blood today." Across Twitter, livestream notifications lit up phones from Baltimore to Bakersfield. The caption, "Live Vance vs. Crockett." Jasmine glanced at the camera just once. A subtle nod, like a boxer acknowledging the bell. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe deep. But something in her posture whispered a quiet warning. Whatever was coming, she already knew. And she'd brought something with her. The kind of truth you don't scream, you drop. He didn't ease into it. He struck. Vice President J.D. Vance leaned forward, palms flat on polished oak, voice steady but laced with venom. "Some of us earned our seat here," he said, eyes locked on Jasmine. "Others just freeloaded off government pity." The room snapped silent. A cameraman dropped his focus. A White House correspondent lowered her earpiece, unsure if she'd heard right. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above, and then nothing. Jasmine didn't flinch. No gasp, no retort. She simply tilted her head a few degrees, the way someone might when they've just been lied to and already know the truth. Her hands remained still, but her eyes, those eyes, burned cold. Not wounded. Calculating. J.D. leaned back smug, like he'd just delivered a line rehearsed for weeks. Some aides smirked behind him. One even clapped half-heartedly, as if unsure if it was brave or suicidal. Across social media, the clip detonated in real time. Fox called it a dose of tough love. CNN called it a political gunshot, but America knew exactly what it was. Jasmine slowly turned toward the chairman. "I'll respond when he's done," she said, voice like glass on granite. She wasn't angry, she was anchoring. Something shifted in the air, not loud, not sharp, just different. Like the moment before lightning breaks. Because what J.D. Vance didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Jasmine Crockett didn't come with talking points. She came with proof, and she hadn't even opened the file in her lap. Not yet. It didn't take minutes. It took seconds. The clip hit Twitter before the sentence even ended. Someone from the press gallery had it trimmed caption and uploaded in under 30 seconds. VP Vance calls Reppers Jasmine Crockett a freeloader on live TV. It spread like wildfire laced with gasoline. Retweets, dueling hashtags, screenshots layered with disbelief. In a Dallas living room, a retired teacher leaned toward her screen, lips parted. He said that to her face. In Detroit, a veteran in a wheelchair slammed his hand on the table. She better answer him. She better. In Atlanta, a college freshman posted on TikTok, y'all. She didn't blink. This ain't over. The hearing became the nation's dinner conversation. Cable anchors replayed the insult on loop, dissecting every breath, every pause, every raised eyebrow. Was it racism, misogyny, political theater? Or was it something worse, calculated cruelty disguised as policy? But inside room 214, Jasmine Crockett still hadn't spoken. She sat still and surgical, like a scalpel waiting for a pulse. Her fingers brushed the edge of the manila folder in front of her once. Not enough to open it, just enough to remind the room that it existed. J.D. Vance was grinning, but his aides weren't. Not anymore. One leaned in close and whispered something. His smile didn't fade, but his foot tapped faster. Because somewhere buried in that folder was a story America hadn't heard. A number, a signature, a receipt. And when it dropped, it wouldn't just answer his insult, it would bury it. What truth had Jasmine been waiting to release? And why now Jasmine didn't look up? Her pen moved slowly, silent strokes across a legal pad, though no one could see what she was writing. Her posture hadn't changed, but something about the room had. J.D. Vance was still talking, still preaching about generational dependence, still painting poverty as a personal failure. But the applause had thinned. The tension had not. He paced now, hands gesturing toward graphs that no one remembered. "We've built a nation where people are rewarded for doing nothing," he declared. "We need to stop funding failure." Cameras zoomed tighter. His voice was steady, but his rhythm was off. He sensed it too. Something was shifting beneath his feet, and he couldn't name it. Behind Jasmine, a staffer in a gray suit stepped forward and slid something under her folder. A small USB drive. Silver. Unlabeled. She didn't glance at him. She just placed one hand over it like it was already burning. She finally lifted her eyes not to Vance but to the committee chair. A signal. Then she looked at the gallery. Not to anyone in particular, but to everyone at once. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even a warning. It was a confirmation, like a match acknowledging the fuse. J.D. kept going. "The problem isn't racism. It's laziness." And that was when Jasmine closed her folder slowly, deliberately. She was done waiting. Because when someone calls you a freeloader on national television, sometimes the best response is a spreadsheet. Jasmine raised one hand, not in protest, but with the precision of a surgeon asking for the next instrument. "Mr. Chairman," she said calmly, "I'd like 5 minutes to respond." The room stilled again. Permission was granted, and without another word, she inserted the silver USB into the port. The screen behind the dais flickered to life. White text, federal letterhead, a title grant disbursement file, 2007. And then the name appeared bold and undeniable, James D. Vance. A low ripple spread through the crowd. Jasmine turned back to the microphone. "This was a $3.2 million biotech innovation grant," she said, "awarded to a private LLC co-founded by Vice President Vance. A project that, according to department records, produced no patents, no publications, no products." J.D. Vance sat up straighter. "That's a misrepresentation," he snapped, but there was no force in it. Only reaction. Only fear wrapped in faux composure. Jasmine didn't look at him. She clicked again. Slide 2 disbursement logs. Government checks. Vendor invoices. All paid. All cashed. Nothing delivered. The silence in the chamber grew heavier. "Sir," she said, voice cutting clean, "you called me a freeloader for defending Medicaid. But here are 3 million taxpayer dollars. That funded nothing but your name." J.D. opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The camera caught at his blink, his exhale, his first visible crack. Because when you accuse someone of draining the system, you better make sure your own hands aren't still wet. Jasmine didn't pause. She reached into the folder and pulled out a second sheet, thicker creased from pressure. Payroll records, consulting fees, transfers sent to a Delaware-based LLC. One problem: the company didn't exist. Not legally, not then, not now. She held the page up so the cameras could catch it. Line by line, the payments bled down the screen. $42,000 here, $6,500 there. "These are taxpayer dollars," she said, her voice low, steady, lethal, "funneled into a shell company that's never filed a single return. No employees, no website, no address beyond a rented mailbox." J.D. Vance's hands tightened on the table. His jaw worked, but still no words. His silence said more than any rebuttal could. Jasmine leaned slightly forward, not as a gesture of aggression, but control. "You didn't just take the money," she said. "You disappeared the results, and then you disappeared the trail." The room wasn't breathing. The press gallery had gone still. A CNN producer mouthed to her assistant, "How did we miss this?" Because it wasn't just a policy debate anymore. It was forensic. It was criminal. It was explosive. Why hadn't anyone uncovered this before? Or worse, had someone tried and been buried for it? In just under 5 minutes, Jasmine Crockett had flipped the accusation on its author, and the man who called her a freeloader was now sitting in a pile of paperwork he could no longer explain, and she was only getting started. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She simply tapped the microphone and said 5 words that made J.D. Vance go rigid in his chair. "I'd like to introduce a witness." The screen behind her flickered again, this time to a live Zoom feed. A man appeared, early 40s, dark-rimmed glasses, tired eyes, sitting in what looked like a spare bedroom lined with unopened boxes. The nameplate below him read, Victor Gonzalez, former director of research BioRust Innovations. JD's pupils shrank. He knew that name. Victor spoke clearly, no stammer, no hesitation. "In 2008, I was hired to lead the lab funded by Mr. Vance's grant, but we never received equipment. The promised materials never arrived. The lab was never functional. We received empty boxes and vanished budgets." Gasps cut through the chamber like cold air. Victor continued, voice cracking, not from fear but memory. "We weren't a lab. We were a cover. I was the face they needed for a grant they never planned to complete." J.D. Vance shifted in his seat, lips parted but frozen. Aides behind him began exchanging whispers, frantic and sharp. One of them took out a phone and disappeared into the hallway. In Jasmine, she said nothing. She just let Victor speak, because now the lies weren't theoretical. They had a voice, a job title, a history, and a man who'd carried this truth alone until now. Victor adjusted his glasses, then leaned closer to the webcam. The image was grainy, but his voice was sharp enough to cut steel. In 2011, he said, "I filed a formal complaint to the Department of Health. I included budget discrepancies, missing equipment invoices, and internal memos that didn't match the accounting trail." He paused just a beat. 3 days later, "I was fired. No explanation, no appeal, just gone." A hush swept through the chamber like smoke under a locked door. No one moved. Not the chair, not the staff, not J.D. Vance, who now sat perfectly still, eyes no longer cocky but calculating. Victor glanced down, then lifted a printed sheet. "And then there was this," he said. The screen shifted. A screenshot of an internal email thread appeared, dated May 12th, 2011. Subject line, "RE Victor Gonzalez." The body read, "If this guy talks, we're fact. Get legal on it. Bury it under paperwork if you have to." Signed, J.D. Vance. A woman in the gallery gasped out loud. One reporter dropped his stylus. Someone whispered, "Jesus Christ." J.D. Vance's face didn't move, but the color drained from it like a cracked statue. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was now louder than any monologue. Victor looked straight into the lens. "They didn't fire me for failing," he said. "They fired me for knowing." In one email, years of doubt had become confirmation. What else had been buried, and how many people had been paid to keep it that way? The chairman's gavel hovered midair but didn't drop. The room was no longer just listening, it was holding its breath. A senior Democrat finally broke the silence. "Mr. Chair," she said, voice steady, "I move to recess this hearing until the evidence presented can be formally reviewed by committee counsel." Murmurs rippled across the chamber. Even staffers stopped typing. J.D. Vance snapped. His voice, no longer polished, cracked with heat. "This is ridiculous. We're letting a liar with a PowerPoint hijack federal policy." He turned toward Jasmine, eyes narrow, face flushed. "This isn't a courtroom, it's a circus." Jasmine didn't blink. She stood slowly, not in anger but authority. Her tone was cold steel wrapped in velvet. "PowerPoint," she repeated. "No, Mr. Vice President. This isn't a slide deck. This is your record." Just finally, Wisdom lit up for everyone to see. A wave of murmurs spread like thunder under the surface. Even members on the Republican side glanced at one another, uncertain eyes shifting like they just realized they were standing too close to a fuse. The gavel dropped. Recess granted. Cameras kept rolling. J.D. Vance adjusted his tie, but his hands shook slightly as he did. Jasmine sat back down, composed, untouched. In less than 15 minutes, she had taken a televised insult and turned it into a reckoning. But was this the collapse of J.D.'s defense, Or just the start of something far darker unraveling beneath his name? When the committee reconvened, the tone had shifted. The legal daggers were still sharp, but Jasmine wasn't done cutting this time, not with documents, but with people. She stood and motioned toward the gallery. 3 women rose. No suits, no prepared statements, just lived experience wrapped in worn clothes and quiet rage. Mr. Chairman, Jasmine began. I asked the committee to hear from 3 Ohio residents directly impacted by the 2022 housing budget cuts pushed through by then Senator Vance. No objections were raised. The room battered by policy speak, and scandal suddenly felt intimate, human. The first woman stepped up, Renee, 38, mother of 2. She didn't need notes. Her voice trembled only once. I lost my home 6 weeks after the cuts passed. Not because I didn't work, because the waiting list doubled overnight. He didn't just take our housing, he took our dignity. The second, Marcia, described spending winter nights in her car while attending night school and caring for her autistic son. The third, Deborah, stepped forward with both hands trembling slightly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She lifted a worn photograph, her daughter curled up on a metal cot, wrapped in a threadbare pink blanket. The flash had caught the child mid-breath. Alone. Asleep. Forgotten. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She didn't narrate. She let their voices build the wall J.D. Vance had tried to demolish with numbers. These weren't freeloaders. They were mothers, fighters, forgotten citizens turned into statistics by a man who once called himself the voice of working-class pain. And now those same voices were speaking back on the record. How many others had been erased? Before Jasmine forced the room to see them, Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. After the final mother stepped down, she turned back to the screen. There's one more voice I'd like the committee to hear, she said. His. She clicked the remote. The screen lit up, not with documents, but grainy cell phone footage. A private fundraising gala, 2019, Cincinnati. Dim lighting, crystal glasses clinking in the background. At the center of the frame, J.D. Vance standing beside a podium, drink in hand. He smirked. Then he spoke. Welfare queens know how to play the game. The rest of us, we pay the bill. The audio wasn't edited. The laughter in the room was real. Jasmine let the clip play twice, once for the quote, and once for the silence that followed. J.D. Vance didn't move. The room around him did. That footage, Jasmine said, was pulled from 3 news sites within 24 hours of surfacing, cited for national security risk. She turned her gaze to the committee. But what's dangerous isn't the footage, it's the man in it and the system that protected him. J.D. finally leaned forward, lips parting, but the chairman cut him off. You'll have time to respond, he said flatly. The cameras stayed locked on Jasmine. She didn't smile. She just let the words echo. Because when you call struggling women parasites behind closed doors, eventually one of them finds the door and kicks it open. By the time the video ended, the live stream had crossed 9 million views. Twitter was crashing. TikTok was looping Jasmine's silent stare like a war cry. Cable news scrambled to keep up. Phones rang in every newsroom in America, and not just from activists. One call came from Nebraska. A woman 70 told CNN, I'm white, I'm rural, and I'm disgusted. The narrative had cracked. J.D. Vance wasn't just losing a debate, he was losing the public. The myth of the working-class savior had taken a blow that no PR team could spin, and Jasmine Shee stood there alone behind the mic, calm like a storm's eye. When power lies to survive, she said, voice, low measure, deadly truth must stand to burn. Her gaze swept the committee. I don't care how many titles you hold. If your house is built on stolen voices, then today it starts to fall. Applause didn't come, not yet. The room was too stunned. But on the floor, a staffer wiped away a tear. On the second row, a Republican senator leaned back, arms crossed, lips tight. He didn't look at J.D. Outside, protesters gathered fast, wheelchair strollers, veterans, nurses. Signs appeared like sparks. We are not freeloaders. Jasmine speaks for us. Back inside, J.D.'s face was frozen. He knew it. Everyone knew it. This wasn't just a political moment anymore. It was a movement. Would the White House still stand behind him? Or start looking for the fire exit? J.D. Vance snapped. The calm mask shattered. He slammed his palm against the oak desk hard enough that the microphones popped with feedback. Mr. Chairman, I demand that Congresswoman Crockett withdraw her slander, he barked. You want to destroy a vice president's career with internet gossip and activist drama. His voice rose with every syllable, desperation curling beneath the authority. This isn't truth, it's a witch hunt wrapped in text slides and hand-picked sob stories. Behind him, Republican members stood in unison and clapped sharp, synchronized performative. The moment was clearly rehearsed, but it landed like panic in a tailored suit. Jasmine didn't move. Not yet, but the cameras did, cutting wide to the public gallery. One woman seated alone in the back wiped her eyes. Not from fear, from fury. A housing rights activist from Cleveland, her home was among the first lost under Vance's budget cuts. Now she watched the man responsible call her pain gossip. JD looked toward the audience, hoping to reclaim control. But all he saw were faces no longer listening, only watching. The chairman tapped the gavel once, then again. Vice President Vance, you'll have your chance to respond formally. JD sat jaw-locked, fists clenched. But the room no longer belonged to him. It was already shifting toward something louder than titles, toward a reckoning that no outburst could silence. The gavel tapped once. Congresswoman Crockett, you have 5 minutes. Jasmine rose without hurry, no drama, no papers in hand, just the weight of everything that had come before and everything about to land. Her heels clicked once, twice, and then silence reclaimed the room. When she spoke, her voice didn't rise. It lowered like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. She began, eyes scanning the panel. Rust Valley Analytics, $887. No product, no payroll, just transfers to a blind trust tied to your name. She turned toward JD, didn't blink. 2 Beacon Phage Solutions, $1.2 million for a patent that never existed. 3 Coastline Biopartners, $427,000 in consulting fees to a mailbox in Delaware. Each name landed like a nail in the coffin. She wasn't performing. She was prosecuting. A quiet, surgical dismantling of the illusion that power makes one untouchable. Members of the committee began to glance at each other, not with strategy but with concern. Behind her, the screen rotated through document after document, grant approvals, payment logs, check images with Vance's signature. Jasmine didn't point to them. She didn't need to. The silence behind her had turned heavy, accusatory. She stepped closer to the mic, just once, and with the final second of her 5 minutes, she spoke. Freeloader. You just robbed a nation in a suit. There was no applause, just stillness. J.D. Vance didn't look up, and across the country, millions leaned forward because they knew that wasn't just a line. It was the knife. The final syllable left Jasmine's lips, then nothing. Not a cough, not a shuffle, not even the hum of a lens motor. The entire chamber froze in place, suspended in a silence so thick it felt like sound itself had been exiled. 17 seconds passed. No camera panned. No anchor whispered in an earpiece. It was the kind of quiet that only truth could command. J.D. Vance sat still, hands clenched so tight his knuckles had turned pale. No aide leaned in this time. No one dared. Because every eye in that room, Republican, Democrat, press, public, was locked on Jasmine Crockett, and not one of them could look away. Then from the gallery, a child's voice cut through the silence, like a spark in dry brush. That's my mom's congresswoman, it rang out, high, proud, unfiltered. A murmur spread across the room. Heads turned. The cameras finally moved, but not toward JD. They turned toward the child, and toward Jasmine. She didn't smile. She just bowed her head once, like a promise made to someone unseen. For years, voices like hers had been dismissed, discredited, drowned out beneath headlines and handshakes. But now the lie had a face. The silence had a name, and the truth had a microphone. The reckoning wasn't loud, it was quiet, measured, unavoidable. Was this the moment America finally stopped silencing the voice it feared most? Because it couldn't control it? By morning, the storm had a name, the Crockett bombshell. Fox News called her divisive, dangerous, and performative. They ran the same clip on loop, Jasmine's final words stripped of context and painted as a personal attack. Their Karen read, freeloader or firestarter. White House press secretary declined to comment, dodging questions with phrases like ongoing review and legislative independence. Silence had become a strategy, but the rest of the media wasn't buying it. NBC's opening line, freedom versus fraud. CNN led with one congresswoman, one USB, one unraveling. The New York Times front page simply read, "Truth filed under Exhibit A." J.D. Vance canceled his trip to Montana without explanation. His campaign team locked all press access. Internal sources leaked that donors were nervous. And at 9:46 a.m., his official X account went dark. No tweets, no statements, just gone. Meanwhile, Jasmine trended #1 across every platform. But she wasn't celebrating. She didn't post, didn't speak. She let the silence speak for her again. Because while some scrambled to spin, others finally stopped spinning. What she dropped wasn't a moment, it was evidence. And evidence doesn't beg for belief. Now the country wasn't asking, is she right? It was asking, how deep does it go? And how long had they been lied to with clean ties and confident smiles? It started with cardboard signs in Cleveland. Then came the shirts in Detroit. And by the weekend, it was a tidal wave. Across 47 states, people poured into streets with 3 words inked across their chests. I'm not a freeloader. Elderly women on walkers, homeless veterans in patch jackets, nurses, single dads, teenagers skipping school to march beside their grandmothers. What J.D. Vance called an insult had become an anthem, and Jasmine's silence had become a signal. In Portland, a man held a sign that read, I served, she spoke. In Tulsa, a woman stood barefoot on courthouse steps, holding her eviction notice like a flag. They weren't organized. They weren't funded. They were fed up. Jasmine didn't organize it. She didn't post about it. But she was everywhere. Times cover showed her staring down the lens captioned, The Woman Who Answered Back. Vogue framed her in black and white, no smile, just truth. No politician had made both covers in the same month, not since Obama. And still she said nothing. No tour, no speeches. Just a quiet return to her office where stacks of unopened letters from across the country piled on her desk. Because this wasn't a victory lap. It was a fuse. And across America, people weren't just marching. They were remembering who tried to erase them and who refused to let them stay invisible. The envelope arrived without warning. No press release, no return address. Just a handwritten note slid under Jasmine's office door, creased at the edges, trembling in ink. Inside 5 lines. That's all. I was part of the lie. You were part of the light. I ghost wrote half his speeches, including the one where he called people like my mother entitled. I stayed silent for years because power paid well. But your truth was louder than my cowardice. Thank you. E.M. Sometimes the ones holding the pen lie louder than the ones holding the mic. E.M. Elliot Monroe, former senior speechwriter to Vice President J.D. Vance, resigned quietly the night before. The leak hit Politico within hours. Confirmation followed. Jasmine never commented, but by then it didn't matter. The walls weren't just cracking, they were caving. Even inside the building, people were choosing sides. Aides whispered in elevators. 2 junior staffers on Vance's economic team walked out mid-meeting. One left behind a post-it on his desk. She didn't yell. She proved. For every line J.D. had rehearsed, Jasmine had delivered truth unscripted, and it was spreading. No sound bites, no spin, just facts, witnesses, and a voice they tried to mute. Now echoing through the halls that once shut her out. Because when someone finally names the lie out loud, no podium is big enough to bury it. And what happens when truth gets too loud to spin? It becomes unstoppable. C-SPAN shattered every record in its history. More than 23 million viewers. More than the State of the Union. More than impeachment. More than war. They didn't tune in for spectacle. They tuned in for reckoning. Jasmine didn't celebrate. She didn't hold a press conference or host a rally. She declined every major network until one late-night interview, unannounced, unadvertised. She walked onto the set in silence. No glam squad, no smile. The host leaned in, ready with softballs. But Jasmine beat him to it. This isn't about me, she said, eyes locked on the camera. This is about every voice that power called invisible. Every person dismissed as lazy, angry, loud, unqualified, or not worth the mic. This is for the ones who were cut, erased, priced out, and told to sit down. No applause cue, no edits. Just breathless silence in every living room that had once seen itself as forgotten. The host sat back stunned. She said nothing more. She didn't need to, Because when someone speaks the truth without asking permission, America doesn't just listen, it remembers. And on that night in a quiet studio under low lights, the most powerful voice in the country didn't belong to a president. It belonged to a woman who had been called a freeloader and answered with fire. Jasmine didn't celebrate. She didn't hold a press conference or host a rally. She declined every major network until one late-night interview, unannounced, unadvertised. She walked onto the set in silence. No glam squad, no smile. The host leaned in, ready with softballs. But Jasmine beat him to it. "This isn't about me," she said, eyes locked on the camera. "This is about every voice that power called invisible. Every person dismissed as lazy, angry, loud, unqualified, or not worth the mic. This is for the ones who were cut, erased, priced out, and told to sit down. No applause cue, no edits. Just breathless silence in every living room that had once seen itself as forgotten." The host sat back, stunned. She said nothing more. She didn't need to. Because when someone speaks the truth without asking permission, America doesn't just listen, it remembers. And on that night in a quiet studio under low lights, the most powerful voice in the country didn't belong to a president. It belonged to a woman who had been called a freeloader and answered with fire. The petition crossed 1 million signatures in under 36 hours. It didn't start with pundits or PACs. It started with a waitress in Akron, a bus driver in Georgia, a war widow in Nevada. Ordinary people who had been called burdens now demanding something extraordinary, a formal investigation into the sitting vice president of the United States. The pressure reached Capitol Hill before sunrise. Senate offices were flooded, voicemails filled. The message wasn't subtle. Do your job or we'll replace you. Polls flipped like dominoes. Jasmine's approval rating surged not just in blue states, but in deep red ones. In Alabama, she polled higher than 3 Republican incumbents. In Kansas, one voter, a white man, 60 lifelong conservative, spoke on camera. She didn't shout. She proved that's what justice looks like. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance remained silent. No speeches, no statements. The only movement came from behind closed doors meetings, damage control lawyers. But the noise outside those rooms was deafening, because this wasn't just about one hearing anymore. It was about who the country believed, who it trusted with the mic, and who it was finally willing to turn off. The hearing was over. The networks had signed off. But Jasmine stayed behind alone at the same table where it all began. Her hands rested on the same folder now worn at the edges, its contents emptied for the world to see. Yet there was one page left, one line, buried in a footnote no one had read until now. She unfolded it slowly, placed it beneath the lens and spoke. "Justice delayed is silence bought." The room was empty, but the cameras were still rolling. She looked directly into the lens, not with anger, but purpose. The kind that doesn't rise. It roots. Let's make sure silence goes bankrupt. Outside, protesters lit candles. A child held a cardboard sign in the rain. "My mom's not a freeloader." From nursing homes to high schools, barbershops to shelters, the message moved like a heartbeat, steady, unshakable, spreading. Jasmine didn't ask for applause. She didn't need a headline. She left the room the same way she entered it, quiet, steady, knowing exactly what she carried. Sometimes a single sentence spoken at the right moment can unravel an entire system built on repeated lies. In a world where silence is often bought by power, courage isn't about shouting, it's about speaking, especially when everything around you dares you to stay quiet. If you've ever been dismissed because you stayed silent, maybe now is the time to speak. If you had the chance today, whose voice would you speak for? If this story struck a chord, don't just scroll past. Like, share and subscribe to Hill Insights, where quiet courage becomes history and every voice left unheard finally gets its turn. Tap the bell because the next truth might speak for someone you love. Was there a moment in Jasmine's story that made you feel seen? Share it in the comments because this time your voice won't be ignored. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. The truth doesn't end here. It echoes waiting for you.